Hey everybody, my name's Katmeow Garcia, and I'm so excited today to have a wonderful guest in the studio for CoolCouve. We're going to be talking about juvenile restorative justice with Jeff Oliver, who is an amazing, amazing facilitator, educator, media maker, producer. And I'd really like you to just tell us a little bit about the work that you did with Echo, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, Echo has been a really cool program that we've done here at Open Signal. We started in 2000. Well, Echo's always been a program that's worked with marginalized communities. And so starting in 2019, we started working at McLaren Youth Correction Facility. And we worked on two projects, 2019 and 2020, working with two amazing nonprofits, Morpheus Youth Project and Hope Partnership. Yeah, they're amazing. And Hope Partnership is part of Janus Youth. And we were teaching filmmaking and making projects and really giving them access to gear and equipment and information that they really didn't have on the inside, and helping them tell their stories, which we so often don't hear. I didn't hear stories about juvenile justice growing up. That wasn't a part of my life. So being able to work with those guys and seeing how just interested and how like much access to the stuff they had never had, and the projects were amazing. And working with the guys was really it's my favorite project I've ever worked on.
I'm curious to hear from you what your working definition of restorative justice is with juveniles, with also curious about the other side, which is like a punitive justice system. Like how do you define those things? How do you see them differing?
The work that those nonprofits I said do, I mean, that's like the bread and butter. I mean, it would be hard to define it because it's so much kind of like working against the punitive system that we have in place. And so there's so many things that they need to do to, give these incarcerated youth, freedom while they're inside. Carlos, who runs Morpheus Youth Project, not only teaches art, which is a huge part of it, teaches radio journalism, breakdancing, filmmaking, all these different kinds of art, but it is like cooking classes, and like we'll work with the guys on unit, this is pre-COVID, being able to go, but working with them one-on-one, helping them with paperwork, or if anything's happening on unit, going above and beyond, which is just needed. Like they need to have somebody on their side to do that work, and so often that's not the case. And working in a place like McLaren, you see that there's some people who are doing really that work, but so much of it's hard because we have so many incarcerated youth, even in Oregon, where we don't think about it, but they're there.
So I'm curious, I believe that you work primarily with male youth that were incarcerated. I'm curious about like how did the day go when you first like showed up to do this work? What was your like first introduction?
Yeah, I went through a screening process to become a volunteer, and so we went in, we got kind of a debrief on like this is the things you can do, this is the things you can't do, and it's it's like a half day of like here are all the things. So I was a little trepidatious, but at the end of the info session, there's like 6 to 8 guys who are there, drinking coffee and giving you danishes, and you talk with them, and you're like, oh, okay, they're just guys who are in here, and so it was really a process of changing my brain of the like outset of having a fearful mindset about what our juvenile system, our correctional system sets us up for, to be afraid of these incarcerated youth. But when you get in there and you hear their stories, it's just really tragic. So, I started off a little bit apprehensive, what is this going to be like? But within I'd say half a day. We're joking. I use comedy a lot in my teaching. Um, so you're like you're getting this camaraderie, you're building it really fast, and they're just so genuinely excited about having people who are in there willing to work with them, like willing to do the stuff. And I got nothing but like good vibes like after that. It's you know it's sometimes, as Carlos would say, kind of a group full of like classroom like troublemakers. So it gets
some
rowdy.
Class clowns in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes, I mean, I don't know about your experience, but in my experience working with youth who have been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated, you get a lot of like smart kids with smart mouths.
Yeah.
Because they're intelligent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's it's rowdier, but I think that's kind of the way I teach, and the thing that was fun about it is that we're like trying to limit like paper learning, where this is experiential. We're bringing in cameras, we're bringing in all this professional gear that they can use just kind of immediately. So first there's apprehension on their part, because you're like, how much does this camera cost? If I drop it, am I gonna like have to pay for it? It's like, no, this is just, we want to show you, we want you to have these skills.
Because you brought in like C100 cameras
C100,
and like vent and lights.
Exactly. Yeah, and so, when they see that, they're like, oh, this lens comes apart. Oh, I don't want to drop this. So there's a little bit of apprehension, but then they get really comfortable, because we're not saying like, okay, here's the manual of a C100, a Canon C100, how it breaks down. We're saying like, I want to hear your stories, and I want to see, we use them to make sketches and cooking shows and record breakdancing. So we really kind of, it's an educational environment, and they're learning things, but it's not, sit down, read a book, a multiple choice kind of thing. We're teaching in a different way than kind of the failure that happened on their end. That's not the way they learn, sitting down and reading. So the experiential learning has been so fun, and I've heard nothing but good things from the guys about it.
That's really good to hear. It sounds like you were able to, at the beginning, like kind of quelch your internal like feelings about maybe I should have some fear or something like that, which we talked about a little bit in the last show, how our society is kind of teaching us to fear criminals and anything that has to do with any kind of criminal elements, right?
Definitely.
And then tenfold with someone who's actually incarcerated in prison. Yeah. So it kind of creates these barriers that maybe we're not aware of until we start working with people or start thinking about more personal stories of the lives of people who are living inside of correctional facilities.
Oh, completely. Yeah. I realized that I was so prejudiced about, okay, these are people who have done things like, I've got to always watch my back. But you realize, the guys that we were working with were, they'd had a past, and there was a reason these things had happened, and they understood that, and they were working to, make amends in their own way to these things that had happened in the past. And when you're working with juveniles, these are things that happen when you're like 15, 16, 17, 18.
When we all make the best decisions.
Exactly.
That's the time period when everyone makes the most best decisions of all their life. Around the age of 13 to 18 is like, primo time for quality decision making.
If I was judged on the way I was at 17, a decision, one or two decisions I made when I was 16, 17, 18, like your life could be completely different. So when you hear that these guys are, working on advanced degrees, and they're, like younger than I was, they're really working to make themselves better, and that's all I see in there. I don't see the criminal element that you see portrayed in media, portrayed in news. That's not who they are, and so it's really a discredit that we don't see enough about restorative justice and the people who are doing the good work to give them another shot at life. Juvenile detention facilities, McLaren goes to 25. When you turn 25, then you go to Department of Corrections. If you've done something that the courts have said you need to stay incarcerated. So, I mean, you think about that, like 16 to 25, and how much did you change in
Yeah,
that time?
that's the most like changing time of your life.
Yeah.
I would venture to say,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah,
So it sounds like you kind of shone a light on something that we were discussing in a previous episode of Juvenile Restorative Justice about how we have this idea that youth are connected completely to behavior, when really the behavior doesn't actually define who they are. I heard you say that this
yeah.
isn't who they are. This is something that happened, something they did.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious to find out more about what kind of work you were doing while you were there. So I know that there was a book that was being used to like explore emotions and how we express emotion.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So our first year there, 2019, we were using the Lakota Way, which is a book by a Lakota man and about the Lakota people. And we were kind of going through it and using it as a backbone for creating a film. So we kind of briefly went over it. We gave it to some guys. Some guys devoured it immediately and had so much to say, but we were just going to pick one topic out of it, and then we were going to make a breakdancing film, a film entirely without words, but just through movement. We were going to tell a story. So the first time around, we couched it in that we want to create something that's larger than can be explored with just a short piece talking,
A verbal dialogue.
A verbal dialogue. Yeah, we wanted to go kind of beyond that. And
well,
so
you inadvertently then make that more accessible too.
Yeah.
For folks who maybe are deaf or hard of hearing, which is an exciting like benefit of going that direction.
Yeah, it was very experimental, and that's kind of the way I work. I worked with Taylor Nietzsche, who used to work at Open Signal and Hollywood Theater, and
another real true blue juvenile justice advocate,
Yes,
restorative
yeah.
juvenile justice.
Yeah,
advocate.
this was big shout out to her because Taylor was the reason that it happened. It was Taylor and Carlos connecting and making this thing, and it was a lot of years in the making with those two, and so Taylor had kind of couched it in this book and wanted to do something experimental, and that's how Taylor and I kind of work is, something that we want to learn and pass along, but also, on the cutting edge, and so we're sort of learning it along with the students, which I think brings us kind of down from, a lot of times it's the teacher-student, like
kind of cuts into that hierarchical
exactly,
feeling of education.
Yeah, and
sometimes have.
Yeah, so often it has, where the teacher kind of looks down on the student and has all the answers. But we want it to kind of just be a camaraderie, a learning relationship. So we were working in this experimental medium, and also we didn't want it to just look like the McLaren. We didn't want it to look like a facility. We wanted them to make a movie about anywhere. So we actually used green screen we had cardboard that we spray painted green for the floor, and then we brought green screen and put it up on.
Talking to the DIY in me. I love that. Problem solving.
Yeah, it was great, and so we could turn that, and I don't even know how to define where we went because it was kind of space. It was kind of like the
Like
plains,
grassland
plains. We used some glitch technology, video processing.
And were you primarily editing, or did the youth get to edit as well? Did they learn those skills?
Yeah. So they learned the editing skills. I did sort of the touch up at the end, but we were teaching. So we basically used the book as a framework to make the film, and then use the story as kind of a backbone. And then we went and so they did choreography in front of the green screen. They used filmed that on multiple cameras. And then they would take that and then they would edit that. And then, it's learning. So at the end of the program, they gave me their notes on what they wanted the final edits and tweaks to be. And then I put the final edit together. But from story to storyboarding to filming, it was all the guys. And it was all from their ideas. And it was all their input that made that film.
So it sounds like for the restorative justice part, you're creating a space when you're working with youth through ECHO in the McLaren facility where they're making stories outside
Yeah,
while they're inside.
exactly.
And also giving them just a lot of power that I would think that being locked up would take a lot of that power away from you, and a lot of agency that we deserve as humans to have agency in ourselves. And I think that by allowing them to use the cameras, to use the green screen, to use editing skills and lights and all this, and tell their stories, storyboard it all, you're basically giving them agency back.
Yeah.
Or allowing them past to take it back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is really, really amazing. And I think a huge part of the restorative part, because a lot of what we were talking about in the last show was that restorative justice, there's two pieces. There's the person who has offended or who has had a behavioral, negative behavioral issue. And then there's the person who was hurt. And so when you're giving the power to the person who had the behavioral issues, they can find in themselves their ability to reconnect with that hurt instead of just feeling their own hurt, which is usually why their behavioral issues come up.
Yeah, definitely.
So it just sounds like you really dove deep in without even knowing at first.
Yeah, well, that's the fun part about it, like it being so experiential and creating that safe space and working with the guys, because you see that apprehension early on of like, do I deserve to like have this? Like, am I, what space am I allowed to take? And so when you come in and you're just like, take what space, we're making a film, but it can be about whatever, early on it was kind of, okay, like how much space do I take? And
touch and go, feeling out the water, like,
yeah,
is it safe?
Exactly. But we had some youth that, were more reserved throughout the whole thing, but we had some people, we had our director, we had two directors in the end of that film, Tyler and Andy. And Tyler came into our project late, and he had been sort of at the back of the room and a little apprehensive. But we were in the process of storyboarding, and Tyler was sitting in the back and kind of quiet. And there was kind of a lull, and we were kind of like trying to pry to get a little bit more like, okay, what's the scenery? What does it look like for this? We know what the scene is, but we don't know like where are we? And Tyler just kind of slowly was just like, okay, what if it's like a stormy day? Like, what if it's like lightning crashing? And he didn't really want to be that involved in the project, but he ended up directing it because he had such a visual imagination. And so much of it was, him just being like, oh, okay, so this scene is about conflict. So what if it starts off and it's, it's lightning and thunder and, all this darkness and fog rolls in and these two guys are breaking at each other aggressively. And then it like dissipates and it turns into a beautiful day at the end. And he was started with that, and he had no background in film at all, but he then ended up just going and really finding a place in the filmmaking process.
And I wonder if that opened up his kind of valve for storytelling. It sounds like after this experience, I'm not sure if you were able to reconnect with youth after it, but I'm curious if their reflections on it, if you were able to do that. But it sounds like with this specific person, the director, Tyler, that it really opens up space when you're given that ability to grab your own agency to like find your talents, find the gifts that you have to share with the world and not be like sitting back anymore and actually get in it.
Exactly. Yeah. We did it second project in early 2020, and we had some of the same guys in there, and Tyler was in there again. And you just saw so much like starting out, just being like, oh, I know this, and I can actually pass it on to other guys who haven't been here before. And so you saw, my favorite thing is, seeing somebody learn, but then seeing somebody immediately also being able to pass on what they had learned before. And so there were a couple, I think maybe we had 5 guys who had been in the program before that went into the second year program. And we saw a ton of growth and a ton of, finding space and a ton of knowledge. And I think the thing that made that program so great is those guys have such a good community because they're, it's a harrowing experience. You know?
It's almost like they have to rely on each other within the facility as a kind of community.
Yeah, yeah, completely. And so they, rely on each other. And, I only get, fragments and pieces of what happens outside of our group, which would happen every week. But you'd hear whispers of things that went on, and, disagreements, and, gang affiliation. There's a ton of stuff. And so the fact that you can create under those circumstances, that you're incarcerated, but you are able to take your own space when you can get it, in a space that's made so wonderfully by Hope Partnership and Morpheus Youth, that was incredible to see.
Yeah, it sounds like just kind of a mind-blowing experience, and it also sounds like there's a real ripple effect when you're working with restorative justice like this, wherein you're not only affecting the youth that you are working with directly, but it sounds like once they are around a safe adult who's telling them they're a human being, who's saying, no, I trust you with these things, and I want you to tell your stories, then it sounds like there's a ripple effect in their own community, where then they reach out to their own community and say, hey, just so you know, you can tell your own stories, and just so you know, I had this experience, and and it gives an alternate view of, other than those brick walls, other than the concrete that they're like being kept in, like, detained for however long a period of time. There's your presence there not only affects the youth you're working with, giving them the idea that there's more, and that they can tap into themselves to see that, but also then affecting other youth in the facility who maybe aren't even involved in the program, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Which is incredible.
Yeah, the ripple effects I'm still seeing from just the 2 years that we've done this program. We had some youth get out of McLaren and, come to Open Signal and take classes.
I had the pleasure of teaching one of those youth, and didn't say anything in front of the class at first, but we were talking about the ECHO program and how we're really excited to be offering this through Open Signal, and with you, Jeff, and Taylor, and Carlos, of course. And he came and said a little bit towards the end of class, "That's me, that's me." That's me in there.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, good job.
Yeah, it was so amazing to see,
continuing his education outside.
Yeah, and being able to, work with Carlos on doing film projects and really, see it head somewhere, and really, like you say, take that space. It's been really amazing to see.
It feels like a really welcoming space too, and almost like a welcoming with this idea that you have skills now when you leave, that you have this experience and you can take those skills and look to see where you can plug in the community, because typically there isn't this opportunity within the walls of juvenile centers for incarceration. And so because they had that experience, once they leave, they can then go, where's the public access station? Where's somebody with a camera? How can I get involved with filmmakers my age or in my peer group? And it kind of feels like there's just this like extra like safety line out there for when they are, because I've read a lot about youth re-entering society after being incarcerated for a period of time, and it's extremely difficult because the freedom is what's difficult.
Yeah.
Wrapping your mind around not having to follow a line, not having only brick, and outside time for only so much, not having everyone tell you what to do and how to sit and where to sit, and to be able to just grapple with freedom. And it sounds like this gives just a little ladder or a little bridge to that freedom that then they can keep in their mind as they're doing their time. So when they're out, there's just a little bit softer of a comeback, and actually like a welcoming, like, come back into the community.
Exactly.
There's space for you here.
Yeah, and not everybody has to go into film. It's, we're just opening a door and saying like, there's way more choices than you might have seen before. Because so many are, feel so, locked into a place, and, that's, recidivism, like, because they feel like they're locked into a place. And opening these doors and windows and showing, and that's what the amazing thing, what Carlos does at Hope Partnership, where it's, like, it's a cooking class, or it's art, or it's tattooing, or it's barbering. you know, there are all these small things that when you think of, you know, people are like, you teach film in a juvenile detention facility, like, are they going to become filmmakers? Like, they can if they want to, if that's, you know, the choice, but we're just giving them options that they wouldn't normally have access to.
And it's really inspiring to me, because it's like the door slams, right? And you're opening the windows. You're opening other doors where that door slams. You're like, actually, there's these other things. So I'm curious, would you recommend other artists and creators try to get involved in helping youth at different correctional facilities?
Oh yeah, I would say like doing this has changed me for the better, and you know, it's not just the giving back; it's the like connection is so much deeper than other. You know, I've taught in so many other different facilities and different schools and setups, and education can so often be, you know, by the letter and just, you know, it is A, B, C, D. But
finish the project, good, you pass.
Exactly. Yeah, and we're gonna grade it. But you know, actually being able to be an artist and like teach and be real, be like, oh, we could try that. I don't know what's gonna happen. You know, the vulnerability that you then see back and forth. I wouldn't trade that for anything. So yeah, I would recommend that any artist who feels like they can contribute, yeah, learn how to volunteer. Even now in COVID, there are ways to do that. I mean, they have a whole, you know, I talked to them early on in the pandemic, and they were giving me tips on, you know, how to be locked up, and they were just like, yeah.
Here's how to pass the time when you're stuck inside.
Exactly. Yeah. For them, they were like, oh yeah, we know how to
good at this.
Yeah, we know how to do this. Like, so they gave us advice on that sort of stuff. So, you know, there's going to be a two-way street if you get involved with anybody in that situation, incarcerated youth. So yeah, 100%.
Well, my mother always told me, because she's a teacher as well, that the best teachers learn from their students more than they teach. So really keeping yourself open as an artist or a teaching artist to that learning, that you're going to learn something. And if you're not learning, then you need to reevaluate like what you're doing.
Completely.
Because if you're not learning, you're not growing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, do you have a way that folks could maybe get in touch with, you said Morpheus Youth, the Johnny's Youth Project, and...
Yeah, those are the two big ones. Yeah. So if you're interested, McLaren Youth Corrections is where I work, and Hope Partnership and Morpheus Youth, and so Hope Partnership is part of Janus Youth. So Kathleen is the main contact at Hope Partnership. Has been working there for years. It's a real tough, but like motherly figure to all those guys, and really is the first one who sets that space, creates that space. But yeah, reaching out to Morpheus Youth Project or Hope Partnership, if you want to learn more, those would be great.
And we can put some links for you below so that you can check that out too. Right there. I'm also curious, how have you found that after doing this work that you've changed in maybe how you approach people outside of the correctional facility? Have you had conversations with others about your experience since, and really delved into the change for you and how you were kind of forced to confront your biases?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have so many conversations with people where when I right off the bat will explain, like, this was my favorite project I've ever done, and people are like, weren't you scared? Like, where I was, or even more fearful. Weren't you afraid for your safety? Kind of why would you do that? Because these people have hurt people or killed people. People's heads just kind of explode. Because we're programmed with this kind of law and order, CSI.
It's all murderers.
Yeah, it's murderers and bad guys, and we need to put them away, or else we're not going to be safe. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I have a lot of, and I think it's the most powerful thing, having one-on-one conversations with people about, these guys are really trying to make something of their lives and really it's so different than what you think. I had this prejudice, and so I think that's the biggest thing I can do is say, I had this prejudice because I didn't know. I wasn't exposed to it. When I was a kid, we talked about like, oh, that kid was in juvie and now they're in our school. I had that. I don't have it anymore because I've actually met them, and they're delightful. They're the funniest guys ever. It was the lightest atmosphere I've ever taught in. I was never for fear of my life. And I can't wait for COVID to be over so I can go and do more. So yeah, at any time that I can communicate that to people, especially one-on-one, I try to confront that because I know what it was like to just, have in the back of your head that, you don't see incarcerated people, but you're aware that like, oh, they're out there, they're dangerous. But that's not true.
Yeah, it's almost evident in the way that facilities are built too. They're kind of hidden away and often these like corner spaces where we don't have to look at them when we're driving down the freeway. So it's almost like giving it this mystery, but then at the same time the hyper sensationalized idea of like, oh, it's full of like bad people and criminals. But where in your experience, and a lot of people who are working in restorative juvenile justice and restorative justice with adults who are incarcerated are finding, wait, these are people.
Yeah.
And there's an experience that they have had that where maybe there's bad choices, or maybe there's things that they're choosing between two, like lesser of two evils situation, and finding out, but there's so much more to them. They're humans like we are. And then once that connection's formed, it sounds like you'll never be the same.
Yeah, and giving the incarcerated youth, in our case, the chance to tell their stories. We started off talking about media literacy and talking about like, do you see yourself on screen? And a lot of the guys were like, well, I see a version. I see like a gangbanger, or I see this type of trope of person, but I don't see myself. And so giving them the chance to like, okay, how can I tell my story? How can I, and some of it's not through film. In the beginning of Phoenix Rising, there's a poem that by a guy Mauricio, which I think is one of the most touching things about just telling that story, talking about some of the fear that's there, but also the camaraderie, and it's just so emotional, and just a poem, and like really hearing the truth from somebody who sometimes has to be tough on the outside, but giving them the outlet of all these different art disciplines to be able to tell their story and let it get out. It's so powerful.
There's a large amount of evidence-based research that shows that writing down trauma and also speaking to the trauma, like telling the story, is actually really, really indicative of the process of healing, like getting a good start, and really pushes healing forward. So anytime that we're working with youth or adults who have been incarcerated, for sure, incarceration is trauma, any opportunity to tell those stories is definitely restorative, because then they're starting to start that healing process if they haven't already, and it's really just pushing it forward. So that's amazing that there was that opportunity as well, that you didn't silo everything into like a film that has to look this way.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that about your teaching style of like having it be organic and leaving it open. It seems like then you can tap into all the youth you're working with talents and all their skill sets and not leave anybody out.
Yeah. So the first year we made Phoenix Rising, the breakdancing film, and the second year we did a cooking show, we did sketch comedy, we did personal narratives, which are just minute-long pieces that are set to, a lot of them are set to poetry and music. But yeah, I wanted them to know that there's so many, we say film, but what does that mean? And there's so many different ways to do it. And so I want to give you the tools to, make the package of a sketch or a cooking show or a breakdancing film or a documentary. We brought breakdancers in and talked to them about how it had changed their life. So, just how do you edit a documentary together, and giving them those skills, so they can tell their story.
Yeah, and pick and choose which way that they feel like most powerful in.
Exactly.
Whether it's spoken word, whether it's the editing, whether it's the storyboarding process and the visual of like a true director. I mean, it sounds like this youth is definitely like deep down a director inside. And with all these different opportunities, you're really just allowing them to tap into the things that they were meant to be doing in life. And I like that it almost sounds like it's like a break from this really traumatic thing, which it's been shown that locking people up is actually a form of torture.
Yeah.
So being able to go in, break into that system and offer this is really valuable. And I'm excited for more people to see this program and maybe get involved if they can. Again, the links to these different folks, the HOPE program, the Morpheus Youth, and Jonas Youth, we'll put in the program here below, so you can check those out. And I'm also curious, what would you say to someone who says, you're coddling these kids, you're giving them whatever, you're giving them all this stuff, they did a crime, they need to pay for what they did? What would you say to somebody who had that mentality?
I still hear so many people that I count as friends say things that are like, if you do the crime, you do the time. But it's just based on these sound bites that we hear. Like I say, I hear all the time, I see on television all the time, all these things about criminals. And, I talk to people about, my experience. So that's what I always tie back to. Is like, I can tell you what I know about these guys. Like, it doesn't work. Like, we know it doesn't work. Like, we have studies that prove that it doesn't work, punishing people, and then that's going to save us, save our country, save our world. So I try to relate it as personal as possible, because I don't have a huge solution for the entire world, but I can tell you that, relating to these guys and sitting down with them one-on-one, like, it's not what you would think it is. And so if you're coming at it from the fear of, you just want to put murderers on the loose, all this sort of stuff, like, that's not what I want to do. But, I feel like there's these different ways that we haven't even explored, to make our society better. That punishment, obviously, it hasn't worked. Our prison system is broken, and it's been broken for a long time. And so restorative justice is way forward.
And oftentimes I hear that the system is broken, and I have to pipe up and I have to say, well, actually it's not broken. The system was actually set up in this way to incarcerate a large number of the population, so that there is this privatization of the prisons, creating a large flux of money from the state going towards these prisons, which is then sitting in the pockets of the shareholders of these prisons.
Yeah,
and so
true.
It's a machine built to continue to, especially at a young age, get youth in so they stay in.
Yeah.
And so this restorative work that you're doing is like counter to a system that was built to keep incarcerating people.
Yeah.
And so I always have to pipe up and say that.
Very true.
But I think that working within it gives a lot of hope to the folks that are in there. It gives a lot of hope to me too, just hearing your story that your mind was changed, that you had the mentality before and then came to find, whoa, these are young people. And putting yourself, I heard you say that you thought of your own self at that age. And I'm wondering maybe if that's a way we can talk to others too. Say, think about the worst thing you did as a teen. And what if you had been caught?
Yeah.
Doing that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of troublemakers at that age that, if you get caught for that one thing, and that's, on more than a permanent record, if that's...
Yeah, if you had to face the consequence for everything you've ever misstepped.
Yeah, and that's what, anybody does a Google search of you, that's what they come up with. You're never going to be able to get a job again because of this. There's one decision in your life. Yeah.
kind of changes that perspective a little bit.
Definitely.
Ooh, I've got the feels now, Jeff. I'm so thankful that you came here today. Thankful for the work that you're doing. I'm thankful for the opportunity with Carlos and Taylor and the ECHO program. And I'm just really excited to see what you do in the future. And I'm excited to work with youth again in person who have been involved in that program, because they aren't. The youth I've met who have been released from the facility seem very motivated to get into the filmmaking and into the storytelling and keep going with that. So
definitely.
I appreciate that, Ripple.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
We'll have to have you again sometime.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
CoolCouve. This has been an episode on restorative juvenile justice with the lovely, the fabulous, the comedic, and awesome Jeff Oliver.